Hello everyone, welcome back to the 15th part of a multi-part tutorial series covering how to mod Hotline Miami. Today we're going to be getting into dialogue and cutscenes, more into just dialogue really, not so much cutscenes like moving a player character around or, having a character walk or shoot another character or whatever. I'll probably get more into that in a later video. This is mainly covering just dialogue. Now, I know I said I was going to finish the rest of the fans' videos before I got into this, or got into anything else at all, really, but this was a request, and it was actually requested a long time ago, and it's relatively easy to do, so I thought I'd just get this out real quick. It has been like 3 or 4 months since I've made a video, but you know how that is, adult life. Work has been kicking my ass, and trying to go to college, that sort of thing. But anyways, so I guess the first thing we'll look at is just simply editing dialogue. And so to edit existing dialogue, you'll just want to bring up the scrGetMessage, and this has all of the dialogue in the entire game. As you can see, I've edited it here. I've changed it to say, this is just the regular text from the vanilla game. I've just changed it to say, hello, this is a tutorial, that's all, bye, new line, blah, blah. It's incredibly easy to do. You just find the dialogue you want to edit, and then you, here, we'll use this as an example. This is when you open the box with the rooster mask in it. When Jacket opens the fucking package that gets sent to his house, and it's got his first mask, it has the Richard mask in it, and it's got the little note. So essentially what you'll do is you'll just open a new line like this, and you'll just type something like my_id.line1, and you'll just increment it, my_id.line2. And so this is essentially an array that just holds the dialogue data. So my id.line1 and line2 is the first line of dialogue, and then line 2 is the second line of dialogue in the first selection or row, I guess, of dialogue. The first fucking I don't really know how to say it. Basically, just in the first section, yes. Yeah, the first section of dialogue. So it'll say the target is a briefcase, discretion is of essence on the first section. Then you'll click to advance it, and then it'll go on to 1, 2, 3. It'll just keep going until you advance through all the dialogue. So I'll just say tutorial test example. Yeah. And so if we load up the game real quick, you'll be able to see that that does in fact work. So I'll see you guys when the game loads up. As well, it's actually really easy. But yeah, so it's got all the vanilla text. Oh, what? Also, don't forget to increment the variable myid.messages. This needs to go up anytime you add a new message. Obviously, just ignore 0. If you have just a single line that starts at 0, because that's how arrays work in GameMaker. They start at 0 and then they go up. So if we deleted all this and we just had 0, myid.messages would be 0. But once we get to 3, it goes to 3. This 0 doesn't count as like a fourth. It's just 0. So yeah, make sure you do that. Otherwise, it won't count this extra line. So if I would have left it at 2, it would have ended right here, and this would have been left out. It wouldn't play any of this. It wouldn't play this extra dialogue down here. It wouldn't play lines 3. So yeah, make sure you increment that each time as well. I forgot to mention that a second ago. Okay, so now we're in the intro of Metro. As you can see, Biker's there. We're just going to ignore him for now. That's something I've set up for a later part of this video. So if we answer this, as you can see, it has the vanilla text, and then it goes to the text that I've added for the tutorial. As you can see, this actually isn't capitalized, so you won't be able to do this at first. Even if you write lettering that isn't capitalized, there's some code in the drawin of objEffector, I think it's objEffectorHouse, or maybe just the player object, I'm not sure, but we'll find it either way. That basically makes it to where even if you type in scrGetMessage, some text that isn't capitalized, it'll force it to be capitalized because there's a string that draws the text that uses case upper, and that forces any lettering that's used in a string, whether it's capitalized or not, to be the capitalized version. So that's really easy to fix. I'll just show you that later on, but yeah. And that'll allow you to get lowercase lettering instead of having to have capitalized lettering in all of your dialogue sections. And so now we can open this, and yep. And yeah, there we go, tutorial test, example, yeah. So yeah, that's how you just simply edit existing dialogue. It's very, very easy. Like I said, I'll show you guys how to do the uppercase lettering thing probably near like the end of the video, because there's some other stuff we need to set up before we start editing things like that to make sure that everything kind of just to make sure we create everything in an order that's not going to cause any errors or any sort of confusion. So yeah, that's how you edit dialogue. It's like I said, it's very simple, it's very easy, it's not really hard at all to do. But of course, you're probably here because you want to add brand new dialogue with its own trigger and its own section in the game that you can just walk up to and click on, or walk up to, and it'll create the dialogue object, and then you can have your own story or your own writing or your own dialogue essentially. So how you do that is obviously you're going to need the cutscene trigger itself. So where you can go to create that is go into objects, not player. It'll literally be called like cutscene characters. Of course you can create the object wherever you want in the objects folder, but it makes the most sense to put it in here. And as you can see, I have created an object called object cutscene trigger. To make an object, you just right click in an empty space and hit insert object, and then you can name it and do everything you need to do. I'll just close that and delete it for now. But essentially, if we open this up, you can choose whatever sprite you want for your object. It can literally be anything. It's up to you. It can be your own sprite. It can be one existing. This is just the sprite of the character or the object that's going to be creating the dialogue and talking or speaking. So if you want it to be a phone or whatever, obviously you can change it to that. I've just chosen biker here. So if we go into the create event, as you can see, I've also made it solid and visible so you can see it, and it's got a depth of 0 so it doesn't go under or above anything really. Again, you can change that as you'd like, that's all up to you. But if we go into the create event, first we're setting a global variable global.time to 0. We're setting image speed to 0. You can change this if you want. If you want the sprite to be animated, change this to, I think just 1 would suffice. I'm not sure if that would be too fast. I think maybe like 0.15 or something like that is a good bet. But I'll just keep it as 0 because I don't need mine to be animated. But that's up to you. You can play around with that as much as you'd like. And we're setting a variable talked to false. Essentially what this variable does is it just determines whether or not we have already triggered the dialogue or not. And that's just going to be false by default, because by default, obviously the dialogue isn't going to have been played. You're going to have to walk up to it and actually trigger it for it to be played. So yeah, pretty simple stuff. We go into the step event, and here we're checking if the player exists. So as long as the player isn't dead or not in the room, or isn't in some sort of different state, and they're able to walk around and interact with everything in the room, and the variable talk is set to false. So as long as we haven't had this dialogue play out already, we're then going to go into a check for if point distance xy object player x object player y is less than that of 40. This is checking if the distance between the player and the cutscene trigger is less than an axis of 40. It's then going to continue if all this is true, and it's going to call scrGetMessage, and scrGetMessage is going to have the dialogue that's going to play out, and then it's going to set talked to true, meaning that we can't trigger this again because we've already triggered it once, and then it's going to end. So, a few things here. You can just you don't even need the talk to if you want your dialogue to be able to be triggered as many times as the player, sees fit, you can just completely remove this variable and remove this part. So you can just remove the and talked equals false. Instead, it'll just check if the player exists. That way that they can just trigger the dialogue as many times as they want. If you are going to do that, I recommend, this is what these are here for. I recommend having it to where you don't just, I recommend basically commenting out all of this and putting it in a pressed event, which basically makes it to where if you press a button, like if you left click or right click or press a button on your keyboard, like if you want to press E to interact with a character or like interact with anything, in this case our cutscene character, you certainly can. It would just be key press, letters, and then the letter E, and that'll make it to where if they press the letter E and they're close enough or whatever, it'll trigger the cutscene. So yeah, essentially that's how you can do that. The reason you would want to do that is because if you're going to remove this completely and you just keep it like this, and it's able to be triggered over and over again without stopping, that could potentially force the player into like an infinite loop where they can't move or do anything, because whenever dialogue comes up, the player can't move, obviously, right? Of course that can be changed if you really want to change it, but the player can't walk away, they can't punch, they're just kind of like stuck there talking until all the dialogue is clicked through. But once you click through the dialogue, they're still going to be within range most likely, and then it'll just play again and again, and that can be kind of annoying. So I recommend you don't just have it based on how close the player is. At that point, if you want it to be triggered over and over again, I recommend you make it to where they have to press a button to trigger it. That way they don't do it over and over again on accident. So as you can see, I've given the player the choice here to either left or right click. You can mess around with that as much as you like. If you want them to be able to press E or click or do whatever, you can add a bunch of different events. It's up to you. But the left pressed essentially just performs the right pressed event, and the right pressed event has the code that actually plays the dialogue. As you can see, I've commented it out because I don't mind. I've opted to only have my dialogue play once, so I don't need the player to have to click. I just have it to where they walk up and it plays, of course. But essentially, if we were to uncomment this and then comment this out, basically it would still check if the player is close enough. That way you don't just right or left click and it just plays dialogue from a character that's like across the fucking room and confuse the shit out of whoever's playing your game. So that way, you know, yeah, it just checks if you're close enough. You click the button to talk to the person. You might want to have like a prompt or whatever. Obviously, ideally you'd have a tutorial, teaching the player what button is interact and whatnot, and then they could go up to people and click on them. Maybe you'd have like your person highlighted or whatever, and then yeah, they'll be able to talk to them if they're close enough. And then if you want, like I said, you can remove this and they can talk to them as many times as they'd like. You can have different variables or flags that make it to where different dialogue plays after they've talked once. It's all up to you. So yeah, but I'll go ahead and comment that back out because, like I said, I'm just going to have mine play through the step event once they get close enough. So yeah, that's essentially that. It's pretty easy. I do need to show you scrGetMessage now and how we set that up because we haven't actually written the dialogue yet. So we'll go ahead and do that. Oh, I already had it. I had it open. That's silly. So basically, if we go and find... Here we go. So, essentially, I have written if room equals RM test room or room equals RM sequence 1 or train station entrance or train station downstairs. This is just checking what room the player is in, and I've added a bunch of checks because I tested this in a bunch of different settings, including combat settings, and we'll even get to that later on. We'll get into how you can make, because in Hotline 1, the way cutscenes work is you can't really play them in combat levels unless you do something called instant switching. And basically what that entails is during combat levels, there's a different effector and a different player object, essentially. And those objects basically handle how shit is drawn and how the player behaves during these different sequences. So when Jack gets in his apartment, he can't punch, he can't attack anything, and cutscenes can play. When he's in combat and the combat objects are being used, he can punch and kill and do everything he needs to do. But if you were to try to play a cutscene with the combat objects present, it wouldn't work. I think the character would literally just stop moving and get soft locked, or it would throw an error and the game would crash. And so how the devs got around this is they used instant switching, where they would essentially, sorry about that. Essentially how the devs got around that is they would use instant switching, which I'll actually show an example of right now. So if we go into rooms, playable levels, part 4, I think, assault. So on the 3rd floor of assault, Jacket can talk to Richter after completing this floor, but when he walks in, the chief will also say something like, you know, whatever, blah blah blah, let's get this motherfucker, boys, or, you know, whatever. And it'll play a little cutscene, and you'll have to go through this room while they shoot at you and all that shit. And then again, you talk to Richter, and you do all of that with, well, seemingly with Combat Jacket. So you're probably wondering, well, how does that work? Basically, what they do is they just switch the effector object to objEffectorHouse once you get up here, because as long as on the previous floors, so if we go to floor 1, as you can see, we have, if I can bring this up, we have regular Jacket, and we have regular objEffector, which enables him to punch and kill and do everything. And as long as they kind of like work together on the 1st floor, all of the code that allows Jacket to do his killing shit will pass. If on the beginning of a level, though, you have EffectorHouse, I think it will prevent Jacket from punching and doing shit. I could be wrong about that, but it'll probably, you know, it'll cause some issues for sure. But then once he gets to the 3rd floor, they can just do a quick little instant switch to objEffectorHouse, which allows all the cutscenes to play, because if it was still regular objEffector at this point, the cutscenes would be broken. And then Jacket can go through and do everything he needs to do. And there's also another case where it'll still be objEffector, but what they'll do is they'll destroy objEffector and the object player mouse, and they'll change them both to, they'll use code to destroy them both and change them both to their house variants. And then once the cutscene is over, it'll destroy the house variants again and do another instant switch back to the combat variants. And that's essentially how the devs did that. You could do that, but I don't recommend it because it's not exactly a good way of doing things, nor is it an optimized way of doing things. Hotline Miami was created in like 9 months or so, so obviously, you know, they didn't have a lot of time, so they kind of had to opt for speed over pure optimization. So later on in this video, I will actually be showing how you can make it so that object player mouse and objEffector regular, the combat variants, can play cutscenes instead of having to do instant switching, which is slightly complicated, but it's not too bad. So yeah, anyways though, we'll continue on with this. So essentially what we'll do is we have our we have a room here, and we have we have a room check, so it's checking if the room is set to a certain So anyways, back to this. We're checking if the room is set to, if the player is currently in a certain room, or if the room is set to a certain room, and whether or not the player is in this room or this current room is active or being used, or yeah, it's just if basically for all intents and purposes, if the player is in a certain room, it's going to check if argument 0 is equal to 0, and this basically just checks whether or not this is the first or second cutscene of the room, or like first instance of this dialogue being played. So like if you had argument 0 equals 0 for like the first line of dialogue, then you wanted the cutscene to be able to, the same cutscene trigger to be able to say different dialogue, you would have argument 0 equals 1, and that would be 0, which is the first instance, and 1, which is the second instance, and that would play different dialogue. And then you have myID.sprite. You can set this to whatever you want. This is the face or the sprite that'll show up in the dialog box. So this is set to Nicholas, which is Beard, which like whenever Jacket goes into the store and talks to Beard, I've set that to his face, which I know is kind of silly because I'm using Biker as the sprite, but I'm using Beard as the face that pops up. But yeah, myID.index equals 0. This is setting the index of the sprite to whatever. You could, if you want it to start on 5 or 6, you can change this, but I have it set to 0, so it'll essentially Nicholas video. This video face. It'll essentially be set to this right here. It'll start here, and then it'll animate, and he'll talk and stuff like that. So if you want it to be set on like 15 or 12 for whatever reason, you can. That's up to you. And then this is setting the image X scale and Y scale to 1.5. This just makes it a little bit bigger so that it fits better in the dialog box. You can make it smaller or bigger depending on how big or small the sprite that you want to use is natively. And this is saying with the objEffector, it's setting the sprite to the same one because objEffector also, objEffector essentially draws all of this as well. So yeah. And then this is just all of our dialogue, and I just wrote, I am now communicating through telepathy, and then Beard communicates through telepathy. And then we set myID.messages to the amount of messages, or well, just as a rule of thumb, you'll just set this to, like I said, whatever you're ending with. So if you're ending with 2 or 3 or 4, you'll just set that to 2 or 3 or 4 respectively. And then we have some brackets here that essentially ends this block. So yeah, if I were to go in right now and I loaded up the intro of Metro, and I went in and walked up to that biker sprite that was there that we saw earlier, it would play this just fine. And it would even stop talking. The sprite would stop animating during these dots, these that are essentially meant to be silence. And the sprite would stop animating, and it would look like Beard is actually, you know, he stopped talking now, and he's trying to communicate through telepathy. And he would speak during this, during the first section of dialogue, essentially. Hotline 1 doesn't have code to do that natively, so I'll show you how to do that as well. It's pretty simple, but yeah. So if I were to go in and do that, this would all work, and I'll show you that in just a second. But first, let's actually make another line that plays out so that we can, I can actually kind of just show you guys a little bit how this is all supposed to work. So yeah, so we'll get into that, and we'll just start with, if, what room do we want to use? Again, the room can be anything. I'm just going to find... preferably we'll start with a non-combat level, because I haven't actually got into how to make it so that you can, but we haven't actually changed any code that makes it to where you can play cutscenes in combat levels, but we will soon. So we would want to do a sequence, so we'll just do like the intro. Probably the intro of Decadence would be fine. Yeah. We'll want to put our cutscene trigger in here. So cutscene characters, object cutscene trigger, we'll just have him right here. we'll set his rotation. Would be like 270. Yeah, set his rotation, and then we'll write some dialogue. So we'll essentially just say if room equals rm sequence 4, or no, not rm sequence 4, or yeah, it is rm sequence 4. I got confused for a second. Rm sequence 4. We'll just open the curly bracket here. If argument 0 equals 0, oops, my underscore id dot sprite equals spr biker face. Actually, we'll do a different one. Where is cutscene characters and NPCs? Nicholas. Where are the faces? Oh, it'd probably be in player, biker, miscellaneous. Biker, that's him fucking dead. Okay, I don't think they have a regular version of his face in here, so I'll actually go ahead and just add that real quick. Okay, so I've gone ahead and added Biker's face. As you can see, it's here, it works, it's animated. You can set precise collision checking and separate collision masks on your sprite if you want. You don't have to, it doesn't really matter at all. There's no collision that needs to be checked. And then just make sure you set the origin to like right in the middle. I could center it, but as you can see, it's kind of off-center with his actual face, so we'll probably just do like that would be fine. So, yeah, SPR, biker face. As you can see, just kind of trying to follow everything here, and it is like it's a little bit different with animated sprites than it is with like just a phone. So like as you can see, this just, whenever you open the box, this just sets the sprite to SPR mask letter and then does the object effector shit, but it doesn't have to change the X or Y scale, I guess because it didn't need to, either because the sprite was already big enough, most likely is why. Actually, I can't really think of any other reason, but I don't think that has anything to do with it not being animated. It was probably just already big enough, but it also doesn't have to set index or anything because it's just a still image. There's no animation to be done. So yeah, that's just something to take note of. Obviously, it's gonna be the code is gonna be slightly different depending on what you want the sprite that shows up in like the dialog box to be, of course. So after we do that, of course, we're just going to set the index to whatever you want. Whoops, my underscore id dot index equals 0, right? And then that all looks good. We might need to, I'm not sure if I need to scale this up or not. I will, just to see what it looks like. Hopefully it doesn't look goofy. Effector dot, or whoops. Dude, I'm like getting way ahead of myself. Or no, I'm not. I'm getting ahead of myself and then I'm getting behind myself. I'm getting ahead of myself again. Image underscore X scale equals 1.5. Okay, with object effector sprite equals SPR biker face. Yep. Okay, and then now we get to like writing the actual dialogue. So we'll just do my underscore id dot line 1 underscore id dot line 2. Starts at 0. 0 equals hello jacket. I'm alive and well. Thank you. And then if you want it to just be blank on like the second line, you can just do 2 quotations with nothing inside of it. So then we do messages equals 1, right? And we end the line. And so if I go ahead and boot up sequence 4, this should all work just... Oh wait, actually no, it won't, because we have to change the way that the cutscene character calls this. So if we go and find our cutscene trigger, object cutscene trigger, we're going to need to change this up just a little bit. So, yes. Actually, no, we might be fine. Yeah, because it's just going to get scrGetMessage. Essentially, this number in here, this is going to get the number of dialogue that is to be played. So 0 will get 0, and then if we had another one, we want to add some extra code that after this is played out, it basically does the same thing, but it gets the second message. So if I boot this up, this should all play out just fine. Just walk up to him. Oh, as you can see, it's a little off-centered. Again, that can be fixed with changing the origin of the sprite. But hello, Jacket. I'm alive and well. What? Did I make a... Oh, I fucked up. Let's try that again. Small typo. I fucking started the level, oh my god. Okay, so let's try that again. Yep. And it plays out just fine. And yeah, I mean, it works. Can't be replayed because of the talked variable. And yeah, then everything else does work fine. As you can see, we can go over here and pick up the phone. If we were to go out and go back in and do that in reverse, it's not going to cause any like overlapping dialogue bug or anything. So if I just go up here and answer the phone first, as you can see, it all works. Then I can come up here and yeah. So as you can see, that works. That's how you get the dialogue in non-combat levels working just fine. Of course, let me really quickly head into objEffector. I think it's house. I have some notes here. Draw text lines. Case upper. Yeah, objEffectorHouse. Okay. So if we go into objEffectorHouse, and we'll need to change, or no, we won't need to change anything later, actually. This is everything we'll need to change. If we go into the draw event and we scroll down, did I say where exactly it is? Dialogue from the draw event, finding the draw text lines under the, okay, I just said it was under the object phone conversation block. Okay. So somewhere in here, here we are. So you're going to see draw text, draw text, draw text, draw text. This is drawing the lines 1 and 2 to object phone conversation. Object phone conversation is the object that actually handles the... It should just be called object conversation, but it gets a little confusing. But it basically just handles the dialogue. It creates it and basically determines or kind of gets the information from like scrGetMessage, for instance, and determines what lines are currently to be played in the dialog box, and basically just kind of helps all of that move along. And what this is doing is it's drawing the text from the lines. It's showing what lines are current, so what lines should be currently being shown on screen, and the line 1 and 2 from scrGetMessage. And it's doing that twice, but down here it's like a background, like offset text that's like colored yellow. So you'll want to change both of these. Essentially what will be here is there will be some text somewhere that essentially will look something like this. It'll say like draw text, and then right around here it'll look something like this. It'll say like case underscore upper, and then it won't be there. It'll be like inside fucking case upper, like object phone conversation. Okay, never mind. My bad. It wasn't case upper. I don't know why I have that written here. I must have gotten confused because it's text that makes all, you know, it's a line of code that makes the string and all text within that string uppercase. So I thought it was case upper, but it's actually string upper, and string upper makes all text within a string uppercase, whether it's written lowercase or not. So it'll look something like this right before the lines are determined, and it'll be like this on both. So it'll be here and it'll be up here. I just didn't bother writing it up here, but it'll say string upper like right here and string upper right here. You'll just want to delete those, just straight up, just delete the entire command. And what that'll do for you is it'll just make it to where any text that you write in scrGetMessage will be displayed as written. So yeah, pretty simple. Let me actually check, because I swear it was case upper. Let me actually check a different unedited version of the source code real quick if I can. So anyways, yeah, that's how you do that. Just remove those 4 string upper commands from the code of objEffectorHouse's draw event, and that'll basically just make it to where any text you write in here will be displayed as written. As I said earlier, I believe. I don't know if I've had to make a lot of cuts because it's been a while since I've recorded one of these, so I'm making a lot of silly mistakes. But anyways, moving on. So now I have showed you how to get a brand new cutscene working, or a brand new dialogue working in any non-combat room that you want, and I've showed you how to make it to where the text can be lowercase, and how you can use your own sprite and resize it and set the index and everything. But there's a few different quality of life things to do, like first of all making it to where you don't have to use instant switching if you want cutscenes to work in combat levels, as well as something that isn't actually natively done in Hotline 1 that makes it to where on a certain line you can stop the animation of the sprite. So if you have a character that's speaking all of a sudden and then it goes on to the next line, and the next line is like ... or you want them to abruptly stop speaking, you can do that and it'll stop the animation of the sprite, so it looks like they've stopped talking, which, you know, for all intents and purposes within the lore, the state of what's happening in your game, they have. So yeah, we can go ahead and do that really quickly because that's not done. It would be, so you want to actually open object phone conversation is where I think pretty much all of this would be done. So yeah, we're here. This, like I said, this handles all of this basically just handles the dialogue showing up, when dialogue should appear, and a couple other things. The index of dialogue, the current line of dialogue, and skipping dialogue, so like, or just skipping the whole thing. So if you want to hold right click, it'll let you skip. But essentially what we're really looking for is the step event, and we want to add one variable to the create event, and that's going to be a variable called animStop, and we want to set it to false by default. This is the variable that's going to control whether or not we want the sprite to stop animating. So if we go into the step event, we have all of this stuff. There's probably going to be a line of code that sets the that basically tells the index to continue to increment every step by the index speed. It's probably going to look something like this. You basically just want to remove that, and what your step event should look like is something like this. It's going to have all this stuff that's all just vanilla at the top. We can kind of just ignore this. But down here, this is where everything is going to be controlled. So we want to say if animStop equals true, we want to set the index of the sprite to 0. Otherwise, we want to increment index by index speed so that the sprite continues animating. And here we're going to say this, we can control it by room. So if room equals rm sequence 1, and you can get a little more specific with this, but for our intents and purposes, just sequence 1, if current equals 1 or current equals 2, nmstop equals true. Otherwise, nmstop equals false. And basically what that would look like is so sequence 1 is the metro intro. So if I were to go up to my cutscene character on the first section of dialogue, or technically the second, because this would need to be like 0, of course, because it starts at 0, the array containing all of the dialogue information, all the text. But on line 1 and 2, where Beard would like stop speaking and a bunch of dots would appear as the dialogue, it would set nmstop to true, and it would actually stop animating his sprite, and his sprite would be set back to the index of 0, so it would look like he's not talking. Otherwise, once it gets off those lines, it would set it back to false, so that way if the dialogue replays or it goes on to a different bit of dialogue, the sprite will continue to animate. Of course, this is just checking for sequence 1, and in sequence 1 there's no like animated face other than what I've added, what I've modified. So if you had another character, this is only checking the room. So if you have another character or a different section of dialogue where someone's speaking, this is going to apply to them as well, and you might not want it to apply because it's only checking for the room. So you would want to get a little more specific and say like, if room equals rm sequence 1, and argument, or no, I don't think you can't use arguments outside of scripts. Well, we could go into script. We could probably go into scrGetMessage and do like, if we scroll up to here, you might just be able to do something like, if room equals rm sequence 1, if scrGetMessage 0, and then that would check, because like I said, this number refers to this, I believe refers to the number of this argument. Then do all of this, and then if you had something else where argument 0 equals 1, which would be your second bit of dialogue, then you could do if scrGetMessage 1. We should mess around with this and test this out. So I'll go ahead and set that up real quick, and we can do all of that just to make sure that this works, and we can mess around with any workarounds that we might want to, mess around with. So I'll be back. Hello everyone, welcome back. This should actually just be like a cut between clips. It's a couple days later at this point. I was busy with a few things, but I did end up experimenting and found a couple of things out. There's just a few more things to do. So a second ago I would have been talking about the feature in Hotline Miami 2 that makes it to where whenever a character, you can make use of it in the edit of this feature in the editors as well, in the level editor in Hotline 2, where if you have a dialogue section where it's just 3 dots, the character's face sprite or whatever like sprite is being used for the dialogue box will stop animating if there's 3 dots. I was going to go over how to just control that on its own, even if there's not 3 dots. If you want to have a bunch of dots, or if you want to just show a character's like shocked expression or something, or you just want them to stop talking for whatever reason, doesn't just have to be controlled off of there being 3 dots in the dialogue box. I was going to show how to do that, but there were a few different things that needed to be called into question, like what the best way to do that would be, and whether or not if you had like multiple different instances, whether or not just having because it was only checked off of like a single room. So that would, if you had 2 different like entire dialogue segments, then it might overlap into the second bit of dialogue, and it would cause the character's face sprite to stop animating, which would be, bad whenever you don't want it to stop animating, because it only goes off a singular room check, so we would have to add more checks. So I kind of redid the whole thing a little bit in that case. So if we go into object phone conversation, and we go into the... I did do it here, right? Yeah, okay. So first of all, I took that code that basically checked which line of dialogue was current, and then had it set to, and then had it set anim stop to true for you know, whatever lines were currently being displayed. I took them out of the step event of this and put it into a script. I created a script in this folder up here called script dialogue control, and this should hold all of the dialogue dialogue sprite. Well, it should hold all of the logic for stopping the sprite that's used in the dialog box in here. So any logic that you're going to put in here, any code that's basically going to stop the sprite in the dialog box from animating during a current line, it should all be put here. The reason we don't just want to leave it in the step event is because that'll just clog up the step event of this object, and we don't really need that. Also, if you want to adapt this script in some way on your own later on, it'll allow you to use arguments, which is very useful because you can't use arguments outside of a script. So you can't use arguments in a step event. So yeah, on top of that, like I said earlier, just keeps this from being clogged. So if you want to change anything in here for whatever reason, it'll make it easier to find if you need to go back. And yeah, assuming you're probably gonna have a lot of dialogue in your mod that you may want to mess around with like this, you don't want to have it all just clogging up this step event, because that's bad practice. So we move it to a script, and we just have the step event call this script, and it'll all still work. And as you can see, some stuff is different here, so I'll go through it. So we're still checking the room to make sure it's in the correct room. Now, if object cutscene trigger dot dialog state equals 1, so let's open up object cutscene trigger. That's a new thing, a new variable I've added. If we go into the create event, we still have talked 1 and 2 set to false. I don't actually end up using these in this scenario, so you can keep them here. Again, this is all relative. It all depends on what you're trying to do. But like, if you're just gonna have a character that has like a single line of dialogue and you walk up to them or whatever, this is fine. You can just leave it as but like talked 1 and 2 isn't a great way of doing it, and using something like dialog state is way better, and I'll show you why in a second. But you could do it like this. It's up to you. Just having a variable talked set to false to make it to where you can't trigger the same line of dialogue over and over is fine. But I've opted to just have like, I'll even comment these out because again they're useless in this scenario. I have dialog state, which is set to 0 by default. This basically determines which segment of dialogue we're on, and can trigger, which is set to true by default. Then this variable is going to determine whether or not the dialogue can trigger. In the step event, we have if not instance exists object phone conversation. So if the player is not in a cutscene, can trigger should be set back to true. If it's set to false, we set it to true in the create event, but it'll be set to false a few times whenever we trigger the dialogue to prevent the dialogue from playing twice, or to prevent a bug where with global left pressed, it would basically left press just triggers right press, which has the same exact code. So basically these would do the exact same thing, but basically whenever we go up and trigger the dialogue, it'll check if the player exists and if we're close enough to the cutscene trigger, and it'll check if we're not already in a cutscene, and can trigger, which is basically just saying if can trigger is set to true. We're opening up a switch case, and we're saying switch off of dialog state, and in case 0 we're calling scrGetMessage 0 and setting dialog state to 1. We're then setting can trigger to false. The reason we do this is because basically if I tried to just use like talked 1 and talked 2 and set them to false or true, and then like the second scrGetMessage call wouldn't be able to trigger if talked 2 was still set to false. And after the first one triggered, it would set talked 2 to, or sorry, if talked 2 was set to fucking wait, was I right the first time? Yeah, I think I was. Yeah. If talked 1, was set to false, so if the first one hadn't been triggered yet, this could not trigger. Once the first bit of dialogue is played through, the second one would have been able to trigger. But just using talked 1 and talked 2 to do that wouldn't work, because clicking this would just play everything, and I basically had everything set up here to true and false, and then it would come down here and check all of that, and because it's all done in one click and GameMaker reads code from top to bottom, everything, all of the like checks I did here were all set to true in the exact same sequence, when I thought for some reason, you know, it would just not allow the second one to trigger, and then you'd have to click on it again. But instead, it just triggered everything, and after you got through the first scrGetMessage segment, it would go on to the next, and it would just all play within the same click, without the player having to actually come back and click again to trigger the second bit. And that's probably not what you want if you want to have just some like flavor text, you know, something cool to where the player can come back and kind of check, oh, do you have more dialogue? That would kind of ruin that. So I did it a bit differently. I tried to do that, but use exit, so that if the, you know, if talked one was still set to false or whatever, it wouldn't trigger this. It would exit right after the first one played, so the second one wouldn't be triggered. But for some reason that didn't work. I might have, I don't know. But yeah. So instead we have this, and this basically checks if the dialogue can trigger. It uses dialogue state for the switch. And in case 0, we're, you know, it's getting the first message. It's setting dialogue state to 1, and then we're setting can trigger to false and breaking. And so what that's going to do is it's going to break this, and then it's going to go back up here, and it's essentially going to, I believe what break does is it exits this entire thing, and then because can trigger is set to false, the rest of this won't be able to play. So it'll basically, you know, it'll check in here if we're in a cutscene, which we will be at the time, so this won't be able to play. Then once we get out, this will be set back to true so that the cutscene can play again, and then if you come back and click, it'll play the rest of this, and then the next bit of dialogue will be, the next dialogue segment will be able to play. It'll set can trigger back to false, which doesn't matter at this point because we don't have any more dialogue, but if we did, you know, it would all just continue, it would just go down the line, you would just keep going, and it would all run like clockwork. So you could do this pretty much as many times as you wanted. So yeah, and then in here, this is all being controlled, and it's saying, if, this is why we have dialogue state, because it's just a way better way of doing things. And we say, if object cutscene trigger dot dialogue state is 1, which we're defining, we're setting here essentially, and this is checking it here. If dialogue state is set to 1, if the current lines of dialogue is current 1 or current 2, anim stop equals true, so this will stop it from animating if dialogue state is set to 1 and current 1 or 2 are the, you know, lines being displayed in the dialogue box. That'll stop the face sprite or whatever animated sprite from animating, and it'll set it back to the index that we've defined back in here. So yeah, it'll set it to index 0. Again, you can change this to whatever you need. You might even want to do some, like, you could even change this in here. You could probably override this in here if you needed to, if you needed like a very specific index for it to be, you know, for it to be your sprite to be set back to. You could do that in here, I suppose. But for our purposes, 0 works fine, or for mine at least. And then yeah, it'll set anim stop back to false once all of this is untrue again, or if it's not true the first time. And then it goes down and checks if dialogue state is 2. It checks if current is 0, because that's the line that I want the, you know, sprite to stop animating on, and then it sets anim stop to true. Otherwise, anim stop is false. So that way, once it gets to a different line or whatever, it'll, you know, the sprite will continue animating. So hopefully, I wasn't, you know, rushing or jumbling through that too much, and you understood. If not, I can explain better in like a comment section if you need help kind of understanding this a bit better. I feel like I'm a little too maybe not unintelligible is the word, but I kind of like jumble through things. I haven't recorded one of these in a while, like I said earlier, so it's a little I'm a bit rusty, but hopefully everything is understandable and what's the word I'm looking for here? Comprehensible. Hopefully this is all comprehensive. So we'll start this up, and I'll basically show an example of what all of this will do. So yeah. Alright, so we are back in the intro of Metro. If I walk up here and click left or right mouse, I'm now communicating through telepathy, and then on the second line he'll stop talking, third line, no more talking, and then it cuts out and we can walk around. But if we come back up and click again, did it work? So yeah, that's an example of basically everything that I just showed. And again, everything else still works here. So yeah. That is how you can do that. Again, this is just a way of doing things. If you only are going to have like one bit of dialogue, this is unnecessary, but I would still recommend having a system like this because, you know, you never know what you're going to do, and this is pretty scalable, if that makes any sense. Like, you can do a lot with this if you're going to have multiple lines of dialogue. Again, you can have different triggers and things that prevent it from advancing onto the next line if you want to have the player have to go and do something before they can talk to the character or whoever again. And then that'll like advance your story or however you want to do things. Again, that's all up to you. So that's pretty much everything aside from the final part that we're going to look at getting done here, and that is making it to where Jacket can actually just to where the player in general can trigger cutscenes and have them actually work in combat levels. So without instance switching, of course. You could always just destroy the objEffector and create objEffectorHouse whenever a cutscene, like right before a cutscene is about to trigger. You could do that, but that's not really good practice, especially if you're gonna have like a full-scale standalone mod. You shouldn't rely on that. You should really just rework everything, especially since you'll hopefully have the time to do so. I mean, there's really no reason you shouldn't. You're creating a mod for, like, you know, hobby purposes, just for fun, for passion. You're not selling it or anything, so you shouldn't really be on like a time crunch or anything of that sort. So yeah, so how we can go ahead and do that is first we want to open up objEffector, and the whole reason that's basically this effector can't trigger cutscenes correctly and it like gets stuck or throws an error is really just because there's no code in the draw event that allows for a cutscene to trigger. Because basically all of the cutscene drawing is done in the draw event of objEffectorHouse. So what I believe I have gone ahead and done should be in here, I think. Somewhere. Hold on. Let me check. Script house call. Yeah, okay. So, up here I have basically made a few new lines in objEffector draw. I've said, if instance exists object phone conversation, script house call, exit, and then closing curly bracket to close this out. And this exits the draw event and calls script house call if object phone conversation exists. So if a cutscene appears, because cutscenes can still technically happen while you're in a combat level, it's just that if you don't instant switch to objEffectorHouse, you'll get stuck. Like, Jacket just won't be able to move, and a cutscene will technically play, but you won't be able to see any of it because it doesn't get drawn. So we're checking if the cutscene exists, and then we're calling a script that I've created called script house call, and we're exiting it. Script house call, I'll leave it in a paste bin in the description, but it basically just has all of the draw code from objEffectorHouse for cutscenes. So if we go and we check script house call, and this is just, again, this is just a script I created that literally has the entire... Actually, I don't even think it's just the cutscene stuff. This is actually just the entire draw event of objEffectorHouse, I believe. So, yeah. It works. Of course, I'm sure there's, like, a better way to do this, because this is, again, like, I just copy and pasted the draw code of EffectorHouse into a script and called it in here. Of course, it's better than just, like, going down here and pasting everything again, because that would cause obvious issues. And of course we check if a cutscene exists before we call this, so it's not just calling it constantly. And then we're exiting so nothing else happens. But yeah, that's a way of doing it, and that'll actually work. If we were to load up right now without change, if you were to load up right now, run your game and test everything without changing anything else, and you put a cutscene trigger in a combat level, and you walk up to it and trigger it or whatever, the trigger would work, the dialogue box would appear, everything would play as it should. Granted that you did everything else, like, you know, adding the room check and everything in scrGetMessage and etc. to make sure that the dialogue actually can play and is tied into that certain, to being in that certain room. And the cutscene trigger has the correct scrGetMessage call and all of that. Everything would play perfectly, but there are still a few things we need to change, so let me bring up my little notepad here. Give me one modding guide. Nope, that's not it. Okay, so I got my notepad here. So yeah, there's still a few things that can happen, like the player can still throw weapons, manipulate the camera, swing or shoot their weapon if they have one, while in the cutscene or while the dialogue box appears, which isn't supposed to be able to happen. So we want to add a bunch of if instance exists object phone conversation exit statements to the global left, right, and well, we'll just go down the line. So left, right, press shift. Oh yes, of course. To object, I didn't specify it here, I probably should have, but what I would be talking about is object player mouse. This is the combat player. Object player house is the polar opposite of this, essentially. Well, maybe not polar opposite is the word, but it's the... I swear I have early onset dementia. I'm forgetting words. I'm forgetting things every single day. Object player mouse house is the counterpart to player mouse that essentially just makes it where Jacket can't do combat things and he's just chilling in his house, walking around, and can only trigger like dialogue and cutscenes and answer the phone and do shit like that. So yeah, but combat version is object player mouse. My voice cracked, you're gonna ignore that. And we want to go add this exact statement, so we'll just copy this here and make everything way faster. To global left button. So I've actually already got it added, I didn't need to do that. So at the very top, if instance exists object phone conversation, exit the script. Global right button to prevent the player from throwing anything. So again, at the very top here. Global middle pressed, I believe, oh yeah, that makes the player lock on to enemies. So again, very top. Global right released is also part of throwing, I believe. And that's going to be, yeah, right here, just at the very top again. You might, okay, yeah, that's fine. That's just setting a variable. And then script player pickup, we'll get to this in a second, I think. Actually, we might get to it. No. Okay, press shift. I get that's how you manipulate the camera, so very top. Press control is something, I think that might also let you, yeah, that also has something to do with manipulating the camera, so we just put it there to be safe. Script player shoot, that's going to prevent the player from shooting or swinging weapons, so if we go into script player shoot, at the very top. Script player pickup prevents the player from picking up weapons. Well, it lets the player pick up weapons, but if we add this up here, it'll prevent them from picking up weapons while in a cutscene, of course. Script player pickup 2 has to do with throwing weapons, I think. So, or whoops, that was the same one. Script player pickup 2. Again, at the very top here. And also check if instance exists object phone conversation aim far equals false to the step event of object player mouse at around line 80. So if we go into the step event, yeah. So if instance exists object phone conversation, we're setting aim far to false. Aim far is the variable that determines whether or not the player is, I think it's if the player is allowed to look or is allowed to use shift to manipulate the camera and look ahead. So we're setting that to false if we're in a cutscene. That way the player can't manipulate the camera no matter what. So Perfect. And then finally, we're adding a check stating if instance exists object phone conversation leg index equals 0 in the step event, again, of object player mouse at around line 6. Around line 6. Really? Because I don't see it. Did I mean draw event? I might have meant draw. Yeah, I meant draw event. I wrote step event. That was silly of me. There we go. Okay. In the draw event of object player mouse, so it's actually not at, it's right under line 6. You want to make a 7th line here. It would be line 7 for you. It needs to be right under this. If instance exists object phone conversation leg index equals 0, that's basically just setting the sprite index of SPR legs back to 0, so that whenever you enter the cutscene, the player's legs aren't animated, so it doesn't look like Jack. It is like freezing in place with his legs at like a weird angle. It doesn't look like he's doing like some like fucking Ginyu force pose or something. So yeah, if we now go in and test this, I believe I have a cutscene. I believe I have the cutscene trigger added into the Metro. So we'll go ahead and load that up real quick, and you'll see that everything does indeed work. So yeah. Hey, so I'm recording this because in my fashion, I forgot to tell you guys a few things. It's just a few minor things that I forgot, but they will fuck up this whole process if you don't add them. It has to do with allowing object player mouse and object effector regular, the combat effector, to actually play cutscenes. And so basically this script house call, I believe I already told you to add that to the step event of object effector. I think it was, or no, it would have been the draw event, right? Yeah. I believe I told you to do this, but there's a few things we have to add to object effector for the cutscenes to work, a few variables. So first, you just need to add this variable last brus and set it to 0, and add brus and set it to 0. You can add these anywhere in here, but I recommend doing it up here where all of the variables are defined, so that, yeah, I mean, it kind of just makes sense. But that's up to you. Again, like anywhere in here will work. It doesn't really matter. And then go into the draw event and just scroll all the way down, and you'll find if black X is greater than 0. Yours won't have this line, but it'll say if black X is greater than 0, draw all this stuff, decrement black X by 3, and then end. You want to open up a line right here, say if not instance exists object phone conversation, open up a curly bracket, and then put a closed curly bracket down here. What this is basically doing is it's checking if the player isn't in a cutscene before it runs the rest of this code, because this decrement stuff right here, this is used during combat to mess with black rectangles that are drawn on screen, but it'll break the dialogue boxes if we are in dialogue, so we don't want this. So yeah, we're basically just making sure that the player isn't in a cutscene before this runs. And then you, I think that's everything. There is one thing I'll show you real quick. That's everything you need to add. But the reason that we do this, the stuff with the black X variable, is because in order for the cutscene to run and for it to like draw everything it needs to draw, it checks if black X is greater than or equal to 45 and then draws the text. So if that black X value was decrementing while we were in the cutscene, none of this text would get drawn because it would never reach 45. It's also natively set to just equal 45, but I opted to change it to greater than or equal to just in case the value is like somehow goes a little bit over. It shouldn't, but I just did that to make sure. It might go like 1 or 2 indices over the 45 value, which doesn't really matter. You won't notice that at all. But it would break this if I didn't add this greater than sign. So, yeah, I just wanted to record that real quick. Just a few small things, but they are small things that'll break your whole shebang. That'll break your whole shebang. Yeah, I'm a genius. Anyways, that's it. See ya. Okay, so we're in the intro, well, not the intro actually this time, we're just in the Metro. You don't actually have to kill everyone to trigger it. That's something you can set up if you want to. It's pretty easy. You just have to check for if like global.done is set to a certain value, which global.done is the global variable that determines whether or not all of the enemies are dead. Or you could just check if object enemy exists. That would also work. So yeah, if I walk up here and click, I am now communicating through telepathy. And as you can see, I'm clicking and I'm not punching. I don't have a weapon, but if I did, I wouldn't be able to throw it. I'm holding shift. I can't do anything. There's no enemies left to lock onto, but if they were, I wouldn't be able to lock onto them. I'm hitting middle mouse. Control doesn't do anything. And yeah. Oh, the only thing is that, as you can see, he stopped. The NMStop variable isn't being set correctly. That's because it's a different room, and I didn't add a room check for that in the script that I showed a second ago, but if I did, it would still work. He wouldn't be animating right now, but yeah. And I can walk off, and I can click again, and as you can see, everything does indeed work. Again, if you don't want it to look like Jacket's punching them in the face to talk to them, I would make it to where you can only hit like right click or something, or like E to talk, because you can't really like, I guess you could make it to where when they're close enough, Jacket just won't be able to punch anymore, but that's up to your discretion, so that it'll just click, Jacket won't punch, and then it'll initiate the dialogue. But yeah, that is everything. If there's anything I didn't go over specifically, or anything that you might want me to go over in like a future video, leave it down in the comments. It's been a long while since I've recorded this. I don't know if I said it earlier in the video, but this was actually a request from someone, so when this goes up, hello, guy that requested this 4 months ago. I honestly hope you found out how to do it on your own by now, because I know that that's kind of pathetic on my part. I literally, he left a comment on one of my videos, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll do that real quick. I actually want to get back into modding. It shouldn't take too long. I'll let you know when a video goes up. I expected it to take maybe a month. It took like 4, so apologies to you, man or woman, who made that request. But yeah, next, I am actually going to try and cover the rest of the fans' videos. I got a request from another person asking if I could make a video on how to make beard. That is going to take me a while, because that's a little more complex. I'm probably going to get all of the fans out of the way first, and then I'll do beard next. And then we'll probably get into some more, like, I don't know, I guess after that I might go into like UI design, I suppose. That's a very broad spectrum, so that's gonna be fun to make. And then I might get into, I guess, or no, maybe I'll get into factions first. I want to cover like mechanics first, like just pure game mechanics and things of that nature before I get into elements like UI. UI will probably be like the very last thing that I focus on in this tutorial series. But yeah, thank you all for watching. I hope this was informative, and I hope it was comprehensive, and I hope I made everything as easy as I could. So yeah, thank you for watching. Happy modding.